Hey everybody, it's Rachel. Welcome back to the channel. All right, let's start with a question today. What if the very things you believe are holding you back aren't even true? Stick with me here. Most of us spend our lives trying to learn, how to do better, be better, achieve more. But what if the real growth, the real peace, comes not from learning more, but from unlearning what's quietly been harming us? Because here's the thing. Not everything we have picked up along the way was meant to stay. I have been thinking lately, maybe the reason so many of us feel so tired, and not just physically, but mentally, isn't because we're not doing enough, but because we have been carrying too much of what no longer fits. What wears us down the most, I think, are the things that we picked up along the way that were never really ours to begin with. It kind of feels like the whole world is being forced to unlearn something right now. Who to trust, what's true, what really matters. And we're all just trying to stay sane in the middle of it. Every day you hear something new that contradicts what you heard yesterday. We're overstimulated, overinformed, and undergrounded. And in the middle of all that noise, we start to realize some of the things that we've believed for years about life, success, or even ourselves might not be true anymore. Maybe they never were. We don't start life thinking we're not enough. That is something we learn. We don't come into the world afraid to fail or desperate to please everyone or convinced that our worth depends on productivity. Those are hand-me-down beliefs passed along like family heirlooms that nobody questioned. We don't start life judging, hating, or distrusting either. Those are the things that we absorb from the world around us, from fear, from example, or repetition. They come from everywhere. Our parents, teachers, religion, culture, peers, workplaces. Be polite, work hard, don't rock the boat. Good people don't make waves. And somewhere along the way, you also get told what kind of person you should be, what's normal, what's right, what's acceptable. Everyone has a version of who they think you're supposed to be. And after a while, you start believing them. Harmless on the surface, right? Until one day you realize those same lessons have become the walls of your cage. You have learned how to survive, sure, but maybe not how to thrive. Psychologists call this learned helplessness. It's that quiet surrender we internalize after enough small defeats. That subtle voice that says, why bother? And that's just how life is. We start to confuse safety with peace, control with stability, and little by little, we shrink our lives to fit what we've been taught. Then, one day, something snaps into focus. You catch yourself over-explaining, apologizing for existing, or you biting your tongue when you should speak. And then you think, wait, why am I still doing this? That's the moment awareness shows up. It's rarely dramatic, usually somewhere between irritation and exhaustion, but it's powerful, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. I had one of those moments when I realized that I had confused calmness with passivity. Somewhere along the way, I started thinking that if I didn't react, then I didn't care. So I learned to defend, to explain, to prove that I cared through effort. Eventually, I realized I was running a full-time emotional PR department that nobody ever asked for. That realization stung a little bit, but it also set me free. And that's what awareness does. It creates space to ask questions. Questions like, who told me this? Do I still believe it? And if I didn't, what would change? It's amazing how often those answers point straight towards peace. Now, I know somebody out there is going to say, you can't technically unlearn something once you know it. And they're right. You can't just delete it from your brain, but you can deprogram it. You can choose to see it differently, respond differently, and stop letting it run your life. That is what unlearning really means. Rewriting the meaning, not erasing the memory. Once you see the pattern, you have two options. Ignore it and stay comfortable, or face it and grow. Guess which one's easier? Yeah, not the growth part. Unlearning is messy because it challenges what's familiar. And the familiar, even when it's painful, feels safe. But you don't have to rip old beliefs out by the roots. You can simply stop watering them. Start noticing what feeds the old habits. The media you consume, the people you talk to, the stories you tell yourself, even the food you reach for when you're running on stress instead of intuition. Awareness is like pulling the plug on a leaky faucet. At first, you're still going to hear the drip, but eventually it stops. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that we have power over our own minds, not outside events, and that realization is where strength begins. Unlearning is exactly that, reclaiming the power to reinterpret, to step back, to choose again. It's not about erasing who you were, it's about updating who you are. So, what does that look like in daily life? Well, it might look like saying no even when your people-pleasing instincts scream yes. It might look like resting without guilt. It might look like finally accepting that calm isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And it might look like replacing judgment with curiosity, catching yourself before the old scripts of comparison or resentment kick in. Because when you stop assuming the worst about people or yourself, you start creating space for something much better to grow. And it doesn't happen overnight. You don't wake up one morning healed. You just notice that what used to shake you doesn't anymore. That is progress. When you catch yourself reverting, don't panic. That's just the old software trying to reinstall itself. Just smile, reboot, and keep going. If you want something practical, once a week, write down one belief that exhausts you. Then rewrite it in a way that brings you peace. For me, one of those beliefs was, it's my job to make sure everyone is happy. Sounds noble, right? But it's also impossible and exhausting and incredibly stressful. I had to rewrite it as everybody's happiness is their own responsibility. Keep doing that until your list of truths feels lighter than your list of fears. And be selective with what you let in. Your mind becomes what it's fed. The news, the noise, the negativity, they all reinforce old patterns of fear and control. So start curating your mental diet like your peace depends on it, because it absolutely does. Eventually, the weight starts to lift. You stop apologizing for who you are. You stop chasing validation from people who were never going to give it. You stop fighting battles that don't need to be fought. There's a moment, and you'll know it when it comes, where you feel yourself breathe differently. Like your shoulders drop 3 inches. Like you finally started living from the inside out, not the outside in. That is the quiet freedom of unlearning what harms you. And it changes how you see the world. Because once you stop letting the old noise run your life, you start noticing who is still trying to feed it. The manipulative boss, the toxic friend, the fear-based system. You start recognizing the pattern, not because you're cynical, but because you're awake. And you start noticing something else too. That without all those inherited judgments and fears, kindness feels easier again. You become less reactive and more observant, more at peace with letting people be who they are. Not because you've given up, but because you have grown past the need to control how others live. That awareness, that ability to see clearly without bitterness, that is power. Remember earlier when I said we don't start life judging, hating, or distrusting? Unlearning brings you back to that state. Not naive, just unpoisoned. You see things clearly again without all the inherited noise. So, no, you can't technically unlearn something once you know it, but you can outgrow it. You can outgrow people, patterns, and beliefs that no longer fit. And when you do, you make space for peace to move in. Maybe growth isn't about adding more knowledge, more hustle, more answers. Maybe it's about clearing out what was never true in the first place. Because once you stop carrying what harms you, you start to see the world for what it really is, not for what someone else wants you to believe it is. And you start noticing that harm doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it shows up wearing the right smile, saying the right things, pretending to be on your side. But it's still harm, just dressed better. But that is a conversation and a video for another day. Anyway, I would love to know what you think. Let me know. Are you picking up what I'm putting down? If not, maybe that's something you need to unlearn or relearn or just learn. Thanks for watching. As always, take care of you, and I will see you the next time. Bye-bye.